The epoch hummed in the darkness, its once bright glow now a faint flicker in the gloom of a decaying sky. Crono sat at the helm, staring into the void beyond the windows. He had been here before, too many times. Each trip back in time had chipped away at his sanity, but this time was different. This time, something was terribly, terribly wrong. The world wasn't supposed to be this way. The Lavos they had defeated, the one that had torn the earth asunder, was gone, or at least it should have been. But no matter how many times they saved the future, it kept unraveling, slipping through their fingers like ash. The timeline was broken, tangled in a web of impossible horrors. Crono's hand shook as he gripped the controls, his skin pale and cold. The others, Mal, Luca, Frog, Robo, were gone, lost to the very time stream they had once traveled so freely. They weren't dead, no. They were something worse. Trapped, perhaps. Or erased. As if they had never existed at all. He could still hear their voices sometimes, echoes from the past, distorted and warped. They pleaded with him, begged him to save them, but every attempt to reach them had failed. Time wasn't a river anymore, it was a cage, and Crono was its prisoner. The epoch lurched violently, shaking Crono from his thoughts. He checked the coordinates, 12,000 BC, the age of zeal. Again. He clenched his teeth, muscles tightening with dread. He had been to this time countless times now, and each visit was worse than the last. The kingdom of Zeal was not the grand mystical place he remembered. No longer the shining pinnacle of magic and knowledge, it was a rotting husk, decaying under an eternal blood-red sky. The epoch landed with a sickening thud, and Crono stepped out into the ruins. The air was thick with the smell of death, the once pristine floating islands of Zeal now sinking into an abyssal fog. Buildings lay in ruins, shattered and twisted like broken bones. The streets were lined with bodies, unmoving, rotting, but not dead. They stared at him with hollow, sunken eyes, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Their skin, grey and mottled, hung loosely from their bones, and their fingers twitched, reaching for him as he passed. But they didn't move. They couldn't. They were trapped, cursed by the time distortions that had fractured this reality. And then he saw her. Queen Zeal stood at the edge of a crumbling cliff, her once elegant robes now tattered and stained with blood. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken deep into her skull, but there was a cruel light behind them, a glimmer of madness that had only grown over the centuries. "Crono," she whispered, her voice like broken glass. "You've come again. It won't make any difference." He didn't respond. What could he say? She was right. Every time he came, every time he tried to fix things, the world only fell apart further. The timelines were infected, decaying like a festering wound, and no matter how many battles he fought, no matter how many sacrifices he made, the result was always the same, a world drowned in endless suffering. "You thought you could play with time," she hissed, her voice rising with venom. "You thought you could rewrite fate, but time is not your servant, Crono, it is your master." She stepped forward, her skeletal hand reaching out, and for a brief moment, Crono felt her icy fingers graze his skin. His vision blurred, and suddenly, he was back in the past, standing in the kingdom of Zeal as it once was, glorious, bright, filled with magic and life. The people around him laughed, unaware of the doom that awaited them. And then, like a wave crashing over him, the visions changed. The sky darkened, the earth split open, and Lavos emerged once again, its horrific cry echoing across the ages. The people screamed, their bodies torn apart by the raw energy Lavos unleashed, their souls ripped from their flesh. The bright city of Zeal crumbled, falling into the dark depths of the ocean below. Crono watched as it happened over and over, the same scene, the same destruction, an endless loop of death and despair. "You can't stop it," Zeal's voice whispered in his ear. "This is your punishment, Crono. for meddling with powers beyond your understanding. You will watch the world die again and again, and there is nothing you can do." Crono's knees buckled and he collapsed onto the cold stone ground, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He had fought gods, monsters, creatures beyond imagination. He had faced the end of time itself. But this endless cursed repetition was worse than death. He could hear the epoch humming behind him, its familiar sound now twisted, corrupted. The machine was no longer his escape. It had become his prison, dragging him from one ruined timeline to the next, forcing him to witness every possible outcome, every version of the same horrific fate. There was no future left to save. The sky above him cracked open, and Lavos roared once more, its massive, grotesque form descending from the heavens. Crono didn't move. He didn't care anymore. Let it come, let it end. But deep down, he knew there would be no end, not for him. In the infinite spirals of time, Crono's torment continues, forever looping, forever trapped. There is no escape from the horrors of the past, no salvation in the future. Time is his enemy, and it will never let him go.